Many of the roles I have taken throughout my career have been roles where the function, the area, or the company have been at a transitional or transformational point. Whether it was, we need to improve and enhance our client satisfaction, so we're going to focus on customer experience. We need to go from a waterfalls methodology to agile and bring our digital experience up to speed. We need to think about our brand and modernize it. All of those things are about taking something that has a legacy and fitting it for the future.
As an experienced marketing leader, what factors should you consider before choosing your next brand to bolster? Welcome to Marketing Trends. I'm Jeremy Bergeron. Today, we're pleased to welcome Alice Milligan, the Chief Marketing Officer for the financial services company Morgan Stanley. Alice's stellar experience includes working with organizations like AT&T, American Express, and Citi. Tune in to discuss the values that have guided her along her incredible marketing journey, and the thoughtful approach she took early on at Morgan Stanley to set her entire team up for success. This podcast is brought to you by Salesforce and the CMO Club. The CMO Club is a global community for senior marketing executives to come together, share ideas, and solve their toughest challenges in a collaborative and trusted environment with other marketing leaders. Salesforce and the CMO Club provide best-in-class programs, events, and a digital platform for marketing leaders to come together and be inspired like never before. Join our global community at thecmoclub.com. For our audience, Alice, I'd just love for you to just quickly describe Morgan Stanley and your role there.
It's great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity, Jeremy. I'm the CMO of Morgan Stanley, and my role really is focused on a couple of things at the enterprise level of the firm. One is really our brand strategy and platform. What's our story and how do we want to tell that story to the marketplace? The next is our go-to-market strategy in terms of how we activate, whether that's through sponsorships, through TV advertising, through digital media, and many other ways. And then the digital experience for morganstanley.com, our content, our podcasts, webinars, and all the ways that we sort of bring our story to life, as well as our products and services for our customers.
Perfect. So you've been in the role now, I think just over a year. So I know you're there. You've made some moves. I'd love to just hear, before we get into your backstory, what was the opportunity kind of outside looking in before you took the role at Morgan Stanley? What was the position of the brand? What did you notice about them in the marketplace that you saw, wow, this is a big opportunity for me to come in and make some shifts and make some changes and bring some value? Talk about that part, because I'm really curious about what you saw, and then we'll transition to kind of when you got there.
Yeah. So I've always, and it's interesting because when we get to the backstory, one of the hallmarks of my career is I do work for a lot of really good brands and a lot of consumer-focused, long-standing legacy brands. And so Morgan Stanley was one of those for me. I've always known of the brand. I knew roughly what they did, maybe not every aspect, like the institutional investment banking side of things, but definitely the wealth management areas and the research and some of those things, and always had a very good impression of the brand in terms of quality, standing, integrity, authenticity. But I would say with that, I always sort of felt like it was not a brand for me, because I felt like it had some characteristics that are pretty traditional in terms of financial services. What I found out after looking at the brand and doing some research, and then actually through some of the integration with E-Trade, is that the brand has a wealth of sort of modern technologies and capabilities. Part of the reason the firm purchased or acquired E-Trade was for the advancements in technology and technical capabilities to be more appealing to broader audiences, because they have things that can serve you from very early on in your wealth journey all the way through your IPO and you're sort of working or being the CEO of a big firm. So there's a host of products and services and things that the firm has that serve all audiences. So for me as a marketer, telling that story and sort of changing perceptions of people who traditionally maybe don't feel certain financial services firms are for them was a great opportunity.
I want to stay on that just a little bit more. That's great. I mean, when you made made the shift, you're entering into this industry that, like you said, there's a persona in that world. There's a frequency in that world, and here you are stepping into a lot of responsibility, a lot of leadership, and you have a lot of capability to do that. How were you received in that world? How were you received in this world that was definitely in majority not run by women leaders?
I would say one of the things that I love most about Morgan Stanley is the culture. It's very collaborative and very collegial. So, what was an interesting dynamic is E-Trade was acquired. We found out about it as officers of the E-Trade firm about a month before COVID hit. So I have never met any of the leaders at Morgan Stanley face to face until about a year and a half after we first started working together. And so we did a lot of things in terms of, Zoom calls and Zoom happy hours and getting to know you. But one thing that was common was just people were very willing to give you their time to share, what they know about the business and the firm and their clients. Many of the employees are really long tenured. And so that says something about a company that people feel they're able to move around, they're able to try new things, they're able to be innovative, all in the space of the same firm over a 25 to 30 year career. And so I found all of that really, really great to join. The executive leaders were really did a lot to embrace the Morgan Stanley, the E-Trade leadership team. And they always talked about, and I think James talked about this externally to the firm, that it was really a strategic acquisition to broaden their base of clients and to broaden their platforms, capabilities, and products and services. And that's how you felt as someone joining the firm, where it was sort of additive. You weren't efficiency, you weren't a cost opportunity, you were bringing in new thinking. And then for the firm itself, Morgan Stanley had really traditionally been a sales-based culture, face-to-face interactions with FAs and investment bankers and private wealth managers, and then on the institutional side. And so marketing, direct consumer, was not a strong skill set within the firm. And so coming in as a marketer and someone who has digital and client experience work, it was really embraced and leveraged and capitalized within the company very quickly.
Wow. It's always interesting to hear what the first 90 days are like when you take a role like this at a Morgan Stanley, because there's nuance and it could be subjective, but I've heard lots of different answers from CMOs, like what they do when the first 90 days. Some of them are really quiet. Marissa Mayer came in, we interviewed her in our studio and talked about when she took over at Yahoo, and she got a lot of heat because it seemed like she wasn't doing anything in the first 90 days. She was very quiet. She was meeting very strategically. Some CMOs go in and they start kind of pulling things apart and rebuilding right away. You've had a lot of incredible experience. I mean, AT&T, Citibank, the list goes on and on. What was your approach in the first 90 days? What was some of the things that you're kind of thinking, doing at a storied brand like Morgan Stanley?
Yeah. An old mentor of mine told me at one point in my career, you have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. And so I would have to say I skew on the Melissa side, which is I spent the first 90 days really listening. And it was, I would say, sort of a very active form of listening. I set up time with all of the key stakeholders who work with the marketing team and organization, all of the critical business unit partners, again, that either work with the team or are reliant on the marketing, the events, the digital work that we do. And then many of the senior leaders across the firm, as well as select board members. And as I did that, I really just listened and I asked a couple of key questions. One was, sort of, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for the firm? What do you see as the biggest challenges? What do you see as those same things for the marketing organization? And then if you could change one thing that marketing does today, what would it be? And what I found through doing, all of that sort of research internally, which was pleasant and has been my experience most of the time, is that there was a lot of synergy across all of these groups as to what are the key opportunities. The key opportunities were to look at the brand and the brand strategy now that we had brought in a number of other brands under the overall master brand and broadened our audience, and make sure we true up, sort of the story we're telling, who we're telling it to, and through what channels and how we're telling it in the marketplace. The second area was around data and analytics. How do you measure the effectiveness of marketing in more and better ways? How do you communicate what you're measuring out to the broader organization so they understand, one, what the value is, or two, what are the insights you're getting out of it, and how should they be thinking about their products and services differently? The next was really around partner engagement. Like, don't market or be marketing in a vacuum, but how do you more positively, frequently, and strategically interact with your business partners so that the marketing strategy supports the company and the business strategy, and that people feel like there's value and you have a seat at the table when people are planning their strategies. And then the final was around talent. How do we find the marketing talent within the organization and ensure that talent is growing, feeling engaged, and we're able to retain that talent? And then also, how do you attract talent? My goal, once I did all of this, when I looked at, the 90-day strategy, I said my long-term goal is to be the employer of choice, or for Morgan Stanley to be the employer of choice of the next generation of marketers. And so if you want to get to that goal, what are the things that you need to do to bring that talent on, to nurture it, to grow it, and to make sure that you're refreshing it? And so those were the things that I did and found out through the first 90 days.
That's great. I especially love the last one, which it aligns with, we just interviewed the head of marketing for ESPN last week, amazing guy named Emeka, and he's been there over 20 years. And he talked about something you just said, which is he talks about this concept of being an executive of the future, and not just being an executive leader of what we need today in the business. It's like, what do I have to be thinking about and doing as a marketing leader in a huge organization like ESPN, like Morgan Stanley, to be thinking about where we're headed, not where we're at now, and to balance that really well as an executive leader that there's an art to that for sure. And so I love that was a key pillar of like, okay, let's make sure we're thinking about that as well as a leadership team. That's beautiful. So the journey that I know of you in business started, I guess, in the late 80s at AT&T. Is that right? Okay. So it looks like you held a bunch of positions there. You got exposed to all this HR, business to business, like marketing, product. You got all this different exposure while at AT&T for over a decade. Was that the beginning of just the dance with business and marketing? Did it start at AT&T? Did it start at American Express? When did the kind of marketing thing come alive in you? Yeah.
I think with AT&T, because I did a lot of that while I was going to school at night. And that took me over a decade to get my undergrad and my graduate degree.
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
So you learn to prioritize and figure out what is really important when you're balancing all of that, which has served me well throughout my career. So with AT&T, I was really sort of experimenting in a number of different areas just to get a sense of what I was passionate about, what I was good at, what I loved to do. And I would say the real love for marketing came more in the American Express roles, because American Express was a really strong, good marketing firm, and they still are and always have been. But I think what AT&T gave me and has served me really well is a lot of what I did, especially in HR, where I did organization design, job evaluation, staffing, recruiting, hiring, and then rewards and recognition. I have to say I've probably used that in every role at every level that I've had in any company, because you're always, as a leader, thinking about, how do you build the right bench strength? How do you do succession planning? How do you think about your organization structure to achieve your strategy and mission? How do you make sure that people feel that they can grow? How do you recruit? All of those things. So that sort of foundation in HR has been really useful. And then I'd say for marketing, the other pieces were, operations and technology, having experience in both of those areas has really been helpful, especially as I've done a lot around digital marketing, media, and sort of the digital experience. The three of those things come together to bring that sort of brand and experience to life, and having that background I've felt has been really important as well.
And then you landed at American Express, where you spent over 15 years there. I mean, just an incredible career there. Again, like, your resume is ridiculous. I mean, if anyone who checks Alice out, you'll see. I mean, you'll know every brand she's worked at for sure, and you might even be a customer of every brand she's worked at. What was it for you, though? Was it just that you were attracted to working with brands that had like a global impact, or just a recognizable brand? Because, like, again, as you charted your path, you could have gone a lot of different directions. Instead, you've really gone to this super clear brand play every time, and you're working at these places. But what is it that really grabbed you and made you want to work at all these interesting places?
I think there's a couple things. The first thing has been, I find it's really important for me to work for a brand that shares similar values to what I value personally. And it's just an easier and better experience when sort of I believe the same things or similar things to the company that I work for. And so a lot of those instances and brands that I work for did have similar values to me, and they had similar values to each other. I remember, when I went from AT&T to American Express, it was like AT&T had like core values, American Express had the blue box values, Citi had their values, Morgan Stanley has their values, but there's a lot of synergy between, giving back to the communities that you work in, making the world a better place in terms of sustainability and things like that, respecting diversity. So all of those things I felt are really important. So that's the first factor. The second, I think, has been, and many of the roles I have taken throughout my career have been roles where the function, the area, or the company have been at a transitional or transformational point. Whether it was, we need to, improve and enhance our client satisfaction, so we're going to focus on customer experience. We need to go from a waterfall sort of methodology to agile and bring our digital experience up to speed. We need to think about our brand and modernize it. All of those things are about taking something that has a legacy and fitting it for the future. And so if I think about the way I innovate, I'm not like the Steve Jobs of the world, right? I'm not inventing the next great thing. I'm creative, but not that creative. But what I'm good at is understanding what is at the core of a firm and has made a firm or a product or service what it is, and how can you bring that current through listening to what your clients and prospects are saying, through understanding what's important in terms of the storytelling, and then finally through what channels and what ways you bring that story to life. I think that's what's I've done well in my career. And each of those firms sort of had that thing where they were like, they've been around for a long time, but they need to be modernized a bit.
You have a lot of experience in digital. I mean, I saw like that started at American Express, and you went on to Coach, which is also an interesting stop, and then you ended up at Citi. But just in your role as because again, like I see you as a marketing leader who has had her hand on the pulse of consumer behavior and the way the world has changed, and I think that you might have an opinion on what you've seen in how customers and audiences have shifted, if at all, from your perspective. A lot of marketers today talk about how the world is changing. I think every year we kind of hear that in marketing, and I think there is a lot of changes. But in terms of just, what you've seen along your career in how brands are engaging with customers, interacting with customers, and building loyalty with customers. Like, have you seen lots of sweeping changes in the past few years? Or do you really feel like the stuff that the table stakes you've learned from American Express and Citi and other brands, is that stuff still just equally relevant to today?
At the core, there's probably things I've learned across all the firms that I've worked with in the client research and understanding of consumers that's at the core, especially in financial services, right? Things like people want to ensure that their information, their data is protected and it's secure, right? Privacy and those types of things. In digital experience, just how you introduce new products and services and changes to function, doing it in a way where you're telling clients and consumers about it pre the event, at the event, and post the event, because they could get concerned again that it's phishing or other things. So those basic things, I don't feel have changed a lot in terms of the need of the client. Now, the technologies and the ways that we protect people and all of that thing have changed tremendously. And cybersecurity, if you think about, the people who are doing that and just the work that they do, tremendous change. But from a consumer standpoint, it's always been important. I think what I've seen that's different is, one, the source of information that consumers value in terms of making their decisions. It used to be that, what you said as a brand, people believed. And it also was, if they didn't necessarily believe you only, they would do some significant research and gather that, and that research would be sort of fact-based, objective, validated and verified. But now people use multiple things to make their decisions about a brand, including, word of mouth, things their friends say, all of those things. And so recognizing that you don't directly control how your brand is viewed any longer, and that you need to understand where those sources of information are in terms of how people get that information, who those sources are, and how you get your story told in the right way in those places to help give people, sort of food for thought. So social media, the different social platforms have become really important, not only in terms of brands, but even just how people get their news these days, So I think that has been a big difference. I think the pandemic has really changed also. So, I would probably say a lot of those things in terms of how people make decisions and what they use to make decisions and all of that may have been like a, couple generation type change. But what I saw and what we saw through the pandemic was people of all ages, so boomers, et cetera, really their usage of digital accelerated. Getting information from podcasts and webinars had been sort of Gen Z, millennials. We saw more growth in like boomers and Gen X than we saw in millennials and Gen Zs during the pandemic, and people sort of just getting bite-sized information through different tools. Our Alexa skill and people leveraging, and getting financial information through different platforms and technology tools, again, across all generations and all ages. And just the comfort and ease with Zoom and FaceTime and all of these technologies that I think people were a little hesitant to use, whether it was mainstream business or older generations, became commonplace just out of necessity. And I think that accelerated a lot of the use of digital channels and comfort in a much rapid pace than we've seen before.
Are you and the marketing team spending much time experimenting with things and trying, how much, resources and energy goes towards, thinking further out and doing things that maybe are, more experimental by nature? Is there a segment of the team that does that, or?
There's a couple of different segments, and it's not just, what I would say reserved for the marketing team, because a lot of, what I've talked about in the past is that marketing, it's both a balance of art and science. Right. And so the science piece, not only do we have in the marketing team, but one of our core partners is the digital data and analytics team. And so as we think about that, we're always looking at, constructing tests and experiments within the current work we do to make that incrementally and transformatively better. But then also testing new thoughts and new technologies, new concepts. We do that with our partners in data and analytics. We do that in different ways. So we have an organization and a team that really focuses on, we call it our multicultural labs, which is an area of the business that's looking at diverse owned startups and how we as a firm can help support them and guide them, not just through bringing them in and helping in terms of funding, but the firm has a ton of expertise as it relates to research for the areas that they may be looking at, as it relates for them building their business in the right way, financially and systematically, acquiring loans, all of those things. And then we have great talent in the firm. So we have great marketers. We have people who are doing data science and all of that. So, we spend time with those startups, just sharing with them, like what's worked in media, what have we learned, what are we doing in terms of personalization and digital and analytics and all of those things. So that's one way. The other way is as we look at new technology and trends, we will do different sort of experiments and tests with those in the right use cases. So I think for me, a lot of times it's really important to be true to what your business is and not like chase after the shiny pebble and just sort of experiment to experiment. So where you may see people doing all this stuff in the metaverse or about the metaverse, and they're in a financial services firm, and you're sort of like, what? Like, why are they doing that? What do they have to do with that? Where we may be experimenting in things like, how do you sort of bring an investment plan to life in a new and different way? How do you take that sort of ride through a potential area, but then translate that into what does it mean for thematic investing? So if we do something that may be experimental in sustainability or in biotech, we've got researchers that have done a tremendous amount of work that can then help you think about, if that's really of interest, how can you invest in that space? Or how can you succeed in that space? So I think it's important as we think about experiments to really bring it back to, well, why should I believe Morgan Stanley should be talking to me about this?
Have you looked into, evaluated, inserting or positioning the Morgan Stanley brand in new places where they maybe weren't otherwise be seen? Like how much goes into that? And just thinking, global perspective, like are there arenas or areas where you and the marketing have decided, hey, let's put Morgan Stanley there. Let's get in that conversation, or let's be at this thing.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of things, and I'll give you two examples. The first was when I started with the team, we were looking at some of our sponsorships and events, and we're still doing that. But we had the Players Championship, which has been with the PGA, which has been a wonderful sponsorship and relationship for the firm. And we had Cheyenne Woods and Justin Rose, who are our two brand ambassadors in golf as a sport. But we started to look at, our client base and also prospects out there. And what we saw is that there were a lot of opportunities, not just for Morgan Stanley, but for financial services overall, to appeal to women. And so we started looking at first, what areas are appealing to them. And sports was one, but also women's tennis was another. And so we said, let's look at that and let's get into that. And we brought on Leylah Fernandez, who is a 19-year-old Canadian tennis player. She's ranked, I believe, number 15 in the world. She has a great story. She's of Ecuadorian and Filipino background. Her dad is her coach. She believes in giving back, et cetera. And so we brought her on, and now we're working on a number of different ways to sort of bring her to life for not only women, but also for diverse audiences, children, who can see somebody who looks like them in the sport and how that person got there, and providing some different insights around that. So that was one way. we developed a platform called Everyone Deserves a Shot. And we launched that with the PGA, where we talk about, the fact that, financial services, many times people don't build generational wealth because they don't know how. If you give people the tools, the education, the mentors, the guidance, the expertise early on, that makes for a very different future. And it's the same with sports. And so we saw a lot of synergies with that. And that's a platform that we're working on. And then there's a few others that we've got underway. We did something with the New York Times in fashion, sustainable fashion in London. And that was really successful. We saw a ton of engagement from clients and prospects, as well as we had people who were really excited about participating on the ground there in London. And then the final thing I would say is we've also done other things with our partnerships. One we recently did with the Washington Post called Econ 101, where we removed the subscription paywall for critical content around the recession, gas prices, and other things that were going on with the economy right now, so that everyone could see them, not just paying subscribers. And that was also really successful in terms of clicks and engagement.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I was going to ask you about that campaign, but you led right into it. So,
all right,
this is awesome. Last question, and then we'll just do a couple of fun questions to end it up. But thinking of your career, and think of a time when you faced a crucial moment, like a really critical moment, and maybe a make or break type scenario. You may have faced a couple of those in your career, but think of a time, where you were up, like the stakes were high, and maybe it was a big win, maybe it was a big lesson, but just tell us the story of the situation and maybe what you learned in that or through that.
I'll tell you a little bit of a different one,
okay.
Because I want to make sure I mix things up for people.
Yeah.
So when I was at American Express, at that point, I was an SVP. So I was one of the top 25 to 40 women in the company. And I had to do a presentation for a board of director and Ken Chenault, who was the CEO at the time. And I remember there were 2 or 3 people who were presenting before me. And as they went through and did their presentations, it was like they were on a Broadway show. No hesitation, smooth, silky, etc. And I got up there and I was sharing work that I had done and my team had done on the mobile app. And it was like the launch of our first mobile app. We had gotten 5 stars in the App Store. Like, there were all these accomplishments. But I got up there and I started to give my presentation and I could not breathe. I totally freaked. I was like shaking. My mouth was dry. I rushed through the presentation. My heart was pounding, palms sweaty. I think I forgot half of what I wanted to say just to get off. And I got off, left the presentation. My boss, who was not there, texted me and he was like, how'd you do? I was like, horrible. Freaked out, said that to him. Everyone I ran into for the next day and a half, I said the same thing to. Terrible, freaked out, couldn't breathe. Everyone else was better, etc. So my boss called me into his office when he got back to New York, and he said to me, "Hey, so I wanted to touch base with you after your text and after our conversation about the presentation." And I said, yeah. And he said, I talked to a number of the executives who were in the audience. And I was like, oh, really? And he said, yeah. And he said, you know what they said? And I said, no, what'd they say? So he said, of all the presentations, you were the only one that had any content or results to talk about, that you did a great job highlighting the things that were important to the firm and the business and how those contributed and the client response or reaction. And then it was nice to see somebody who was human up on stage, not all of these like rehearsed presentations. So he said, do you know what the only thing wrong you did during that whole, week? And I was like, no. And he said, talking about how bad it was after the presentation. He said, if you just dusted it off and said, hey, wasn't my best, but I did X, Y, Z, it would have been a totally different story. And I think the thing I really learned from that was just, sort of, you can create your own reality, right? And you can sometimes be your harshest critic. And so being more resilient, being focused on the things that worked and the positive, no one's perfect. And what you think isn't always how everyone else perceives it. And from that day forward, I found it much easier to do presentations. I wasn't anywhere near as nervous as I was in that. But secondarily, I always took that lesson to say, like, you create your own headlines, don't create negative ones. And I think that was a really different way to look at it. And something, I would not have thought of myself, but it was a great learning.
That's great. Thank you for that. Okay. You ready for some lightning round questions? We've got a few of those. Okay. So before we start, I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for the show, Salesforce. Thank you. For those who are interested in learning more, you can head over to salesforce.com/marketing. Okay. First question, Alice Milligan, CMO for Morgan Stanley. What is an activity that makes you lose track of time?
Home improvement and interior design.
Okay.
I'm never satisfied with how my house or anything looks. I'm always redesigning, changing, etc., and I can get lost in doing that.
What's the last purchase you made as seen on TV?
I would say there is, and I'm not going to know the exact name for it, but there is this stuff that you can use that comes in a big spray can, and you can seal and caulk your windows so that you have no leaks and no water can get through. I purchased that and I sealed the windows down in the basement of my house to prevent any water from getting in.
Okay, I love it. Do you have a morning ritual or just like a thing that you do in the morning that's like, you do this every you start your day this way every day? Is there anything that you do every day religiously?
2 cups of coffee.
2 cups of coffee. Black?
Yeah, nope.
Nope.
Half and half.
Okay.
No sugar.
Okay.
And if you talk to me before I've had those 2 cups of coffee, you're a goner.
Okay. What brand of coffee do you like to drink?
I drink Miele because when we redid our kitchen, I got one of those built-in Miele coffee makers.
Okay. Who do you call for marketing support? Like who do you like, if you're working through a challenge or working through something, like who do you call to bounce stuff off of, if anyone?
It depends on the topic. If it's a marketing challenge, I have, peers across the industry and people that I've worked with for a long time, whether in the firm or just at Morgan Stanley, at JP Morgan Chase, at Citi, we all sort of know each other in that space. So if it's marketing, I'll do that. But if it's a business challenge, it may be an old boss from Citi or from American Express. Many times, because those firms work with a lot of consulting firms, I have a lot of friends who are in consulting, so they always got a good strategic mind. So it really depends on what the topic is.
Okay, last question. What is one thing that you would like to do this year that you've never done before?
I have so many things on my list. It's not that I've never done before, but does actually take a trip that requires an airplane on vacation, which I haven't done in probably 3 years as a result of COVID.
Okay, yep,
Does that count?
Yes, it counts, definitely.
Because I feel like that's the next thing on my list. So probably go to a destination I've never been before. I've always wanted to go to Ireland.
Okay.
I'm an Irish girl, so
Cool.
Want to see my peeps, but I have not done that yet.
Okay. Well, I love that. I love that vote. I've been there. I highly recommend it. Alice, thank you so much for being here. This was an incredible conversation. Your story, your path, your career continues to inspire so many marketing leaders. So thank you for being on Marketing Trends, and have a great, fantastic rest of your day.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is brought to you by Salesforce and the CMO Club. The CMO Club is a global community for senior marketing executives to come together, share ideas, and solve their toughest challenges in a collaborative and trusted environment with other marketing leaders. Salesforce and the CMO Club provide best-in-class programs, events, and a digital platform for marketing leaders to come together and be inspired like never before. Join our global community at thecmoclub.com.